Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My name is Jane Lansing. I am a proud University of Minnesota civil engineering alumna, and I'm also chair of the Dean's Advisory Board for the College of Science and Engineering, and like many of you, I'm sure an enthusiastic supporter of the College of Science and Engineering, which impacts the lives of Minnesotans and beyond. We want to welcome the students, faculty, alumni, and friends to Innovating the Future, Perspectives on Science, Engineering, and the Economy. I am looking forward to the candid conversation with Alleyne, the College of Science and Engineering Dean, and his distinguished guest, Neel Kashkari, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, as they explore the interplay of science and engineering, how science and engineering fuel the economic growth with macro-scale economic understanding. We are thrilled to host this event in person at the Northrop Auditorium, Twin Cities campus, and virtually via live stream. Our program will begin with pre-submitted questions, followed by ample time for questions from our in-person audience. I am now honored to introduce the College of Science and Engineering Dean, Andrew G. Alleyne. He has served as Dean since January 2022 and is the college's Chief Executive and Academic Officer. He provides collaborative leadership to enhance the college's excellence as a global leader in research and education. Before coming to Minnesota, he was professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he served in various leadership roles, including Associate Dean for Research and Director of a multi-university research center funded by the National Science Foundation. Dean Alleyne has received numerous professional awards, and in 2023, he was elected to the National Academy of Engineering, one of the highest honors for an engineer. Dean Alleyne holds a PhD and a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of California at Berkeley, and an undergraduate degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Princeton. Please welcome Dean Alleyne.
So thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is the mic on? All right. Well, thanks for that very warm welcome, Jane. And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon, evening, despite the weather. Special thanks to those who are joining us remotely as well, too. And I am excited and just delighted to introduce a distinguished guest, Neel Kashkari. So, you know, as a faculty member, it's always rewarding when your students go on to basically surpass you and have a very positive impact on society. So Neel was in the first and third classes I ever taught in my career. I remember at ME 240 and ME 336. And he sat right in the middle, not on the front, not in the back, right, not on the side, right in the middle. Always had good questions. And it was clear that he was going to be a leader from then. I've followed his path remotely over the years. And I must say that my prognostications were correct. So Neel is the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, one of the Fed's 12 regional banks. And the Minneapolis Fed serves the public by pursuing a growing economy that works for all of us. And the bank's district include Minnesota, the Dakotas, Montana, northwestern Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So Neel also serves as a member of the Federal Open Market Committee, which sets the nation's monetary policy. He got 2 degrees in mechanical engineering, but began his career in an aerospace field, developing technology for NASA space missions. He later held a variety of roles in public service and finance, quite notably as the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the 2008 financial crisis, where he oversaw the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP. Neel lives with his wife, 2 young children, and a Newfoundland dog in Orono, Minnesota. So please join me in welcoming Neel Kashkari. So as I was reading this, you know, I was thinking, so you started off as a mechanical engineer, and then you went to work for NASA as an aerospace engineer. Others may be wondering, how do you go from where you started to where you are today? Like, that's not the traditional path for science and engineering students. Like, how did you get there? What was your path?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for inviting me here. When I saw Andrew was announced as the new dean here at the University of Minnesota, I couldn't have been more excited. Let me just give you 1 second of background. he made a big impression on me when I was an undergraduate student and a grad student. So wow, this young professor, you're a brand new professor, really seems genuinely interested in his students. And I remember that it made a big impression on me. So I was really excited when I saw you come here and thrilled to reconnect with you after all this time. I was working for a contractor for NASA, what was then TRW, is now Northrop Grumman in Redondo Beach, California. I loved it, absolutely loved it. I was doing research in the basement. I would come in to run my experiments at 2 o'clock in the morning because the vibrations were less in the building. And I needed to have very stable environment to run my dynamic experiments of some of these little latches that we were creating for what became the James Webb Space Telescope. This was the work that was part of that. Now, let me back up. I was a mosquito on a giant project. Let me just level set. Nonetheless, it was very exciting for a young engineer to be part of something and to have some appreciation for the scale and audacity of what they were trying to do. But my managers were encouraging me. I was doing well. My managers were encouraging me to get my PhD. And I knew that if I got my PhD that I would be committing my career. Like it's a big investment to go get your PhD. I'd be committing my career to this. And as much as I loved it, I was not ready to make that type of a commitment at that point. And I decided to go get my MBA. Don't throw eggs at me. I decided to go get my MBA to explore the business world and see what that would lead to. I remember I was just telling somebody, when I chose to leave engineering, I made a conscious decision. I said, I'm probably never going to find work that is as intellectually rewarding as what I'm doing right now. Because it was like you're doing something that nobody had ever done before. And that was very, it just pulled on your sense of innovation and curiosity. And that was true, like when I went into investment banking, until I found my way into public policy. Because there's a lot of parallels between public policy and engineering in the sense that you're trying to solve problems. And you're not sure how to solve problems. And so anyway, we'll talk more about that. But I went and I got my MBA, and then I went into banking, and then went into, it's a longer story, went into government and whatnot.
Well, we're very glad that you did.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I'm probably better at this than I was as an engineer. Some people may say that's really scary on both fronts, but.
Oh, no. So I was wondering, for those of us who don't follow the Fed, could you provide an overview of its mission and the impact that it has? And has the role of the Fed stayed the same over time, or has it sort of changed with the times? Give us a sense.
So the Fed is our nation's central bank. We are the third central bank of the United States. Alexander Hamilton created the first bank. It lasted about 20 years. And there was a second bank. Andrew Jackson got rid of it. Americans hated the idea of having a central bank because it sounded nefarious, a bunch of bankers in a dark room doing God knows what. But then the United States economy was hammered by depressions and banking crises in the late 1800s, and then a really big one, the banking panic of 1907. And then Congress said, well, gosh darn it, I guess we need to have a central bank. That when a crisis hits the economy, the central bank is able to provide credit into the economy to cushion the blow. And so they created something unique in America. They created the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. You've probably heard of our chair, Jerome Powell. Before Jerome Powell was Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan. And they created 12 independent Federal Reserve banks, the 9th of which is here. So they wanted the regions of the country. They didn't want all the power concentrated in Washington, D.C. or New York. They wanted the regions of the country to be directly represented in the policy process. So our jobs at the Minneapolis Fed are to represent this region that you talked about, which is a big geographic region, and make sure that what's happening in our economy is part of the deliberative process. So I go back to Washington, D.C. every 6 weeks. We set interest rates for the nation. We can't set a different interest rate for Minnesota and for California. It's one monetary policy for the country. But my job is to make sure that this region and what's happening here is part of that deliberation. We do a lot of other stuff. If you go to your ATM and you get cash out of your ATM, that cash would have started out in our vault. We supervise banks. We do other things. We do a bunch of stuff. But at its core, the central bank is to provide liquidity into the economy to manage some of the ups and downs of the economic cycles. And to try to avoid, keep a downturn, make it only a recession and not a depression. And when the financial crisis hit in 2008, the Fed was a big part of that. When COVID hit in 2020, the Fed was a big part of that. So in those times of big shocks, the Fed comes in often comes in with force.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm curious. You talk about like interest rates and setting policy and sort of very like large scale macroeconomic activities. So for us scientists and engineers, it would be useful to get your opinion, like how you see science and engineering contributing to macro scale economic growth across the world, but particularly here in the U.S.
Well, economic growth comes from two things. It comes from population growth and productivity growth. That's it. And so population growth is you have more people producing things and more people consuming things. And then productivity growth is we can do more with the same resources that we have. The pie gets bigger on a per capita basis. Like if you just add more people, the pie will get bigger, but the pie per capita won't necessarily get any bigger. But if you have productivity growth, that's science and engineering and knowledge development, then we become more productive and the pie gets bigger and each of our share of the pie hopefully gets bigger too. So for the long-term trends in the economy, science, technology, economic strength comes from innovation. If you think about, I read a lot of history, think about over the course of world history, which economies have been strongest, which economies have been most competitive, which countries have been strongest. It's those that have the biggest sources of innovation. It's actually fascinating. If you go back to the Civil War and you compare the economy of the Union versus the economy of the Confederacy, the Union was a raging innovation center, and the Confederacy had slavery and agriculture. And slavery was horrible for 1,000 different reasons, and they had an economy based on slavery and agriculture. Their entire economic model was we need more land and we need more slaves. That was their economy. In the North, they had technology development, they had railroads, they had the telegraph. It was a completely different country, a completely different economy. And so, and go to World War II. The US won World War II in part because we had this extraordinary innovation engine. They call it the arsenal of democracy that was able to create this, not only create these armaments to defeat the Nazis, but be able to grow the economy so rapidly that the sacrifices the American people had to make while they're funding the military were very modest compared to every other country because of our innovation. So if you think about long-term success of societies, science, innovation, they're not the only things that matter, but they're really important.
Okay, that's great, and I agree 100%, but I'm biased. If I could sort of dig a little deeper, and now I'm again revealing a little bit. If I remember correctly, you were actually on the solar vehicle team.
I was.
Yes, I remember that back at Illinois. 30-something years ago now. And Minnesota, we have a solar vehicle team here as well too. Very proud of that. It's one of the top ones in the world. And that's partly, we're really known for our activity in sustainability, solar power, wind, things like that. So thinking of things like solar, wind, possibly nuclear, other types of energy, how do you see the long-term future of energy and its impact on economic policy in the U.S.? Should we advocate for cheaper energy, more sustainable, even though it might cost a little bit more, both, a mix?
Boy, it's a tough question. If you think about, first of all, the fact that in the last 10 years, the United States has become much less reliant on foreign sources of energy has provided us economic resilience. That's indisputable. That's absolutely true and important. And given all the geopolitical dynamics that have been going on over the last 10 years, that's been a real source of strength for us in terms of having some level of security. So that's one thing that I would say, more resilience. Number two, I think lots of sources of different types of energy makes us more, so I'm looking at it through the lens of an economic policymaker and how do we have an economy that is resilient. The more diverse sources of energy we have, the less vulnerable we are if there's a disruption in any one of those sources. So diversity of sources, I think, is important. If you think about climate change, and I'm not a climate scientist, we need massive technology breakthroughs to address this. Us turning up our thermostats or turning down our thermostats, depending on the season, is not going to make any difference unless we can get the rest of the world to go along. And the only way we get the rest of the world to go along is we say it's cleaner and cheaper. Other countries have said, developing countries have said, we are not going to spend more money to slow this down. You didn't do it. You didn't spend more money when you were developing. We're not going to spend more money now. So we have to develop, you all have to develop technologies that are both cleaner and cheaper so that there's no sacrifice that's being asked. Now, that's not a, maybe you're not going to like me saying that, but I think that's the reality of what we're facing. And so, pioneering all forms of technology development to figure out where's the breakthrough going to come from, what's going to be that miracle that is both cheaper and cleaner. You can't. I always say to people, when I was at Treasury back in 2006, doing a bunch of work on alternative energy, because my boss, the Treasury Secretary, cared a lot about alternative energy and the environment. And we'd meet with the Department of Energy, and they had lists of technologies, of their favorite technologies. And I remember somebody commented that whatever's on your list is probably wrong, right? Because when they were looking for a replacement for whale oil, electricity was not on anybody's list.
Right.
And that's just the nature of scientific breakthroughs. Scientific breakthroughs are really hard. You need to plant 1,000 flowers and hope that a few of them bloom, and you can't predict which one's going to bloom.
And I guess that's part of our job here is to, try and make some of those flowers bloom. The Fed doesn't go ahead and develop the technology, but certainly you utilize the technologies, and I'm sort of, there have been lots of technological advances over the last 20 plus years, a lot around information, transmission, gathering, computation. So I'm curious, like, how does the Fed take advantage of these, computing, AI, communications in their sort of day-to-day operations? And sort of like a sub question is like, why can't you just make a giant AI model of the economy?
Well, we'd love to. So we use lots of tools. We have a brilliant team of PhD economists that work very closely with economists at the University of Minnesota. And they've utilized big data to we get data sets that we didn't have access to before. And maybe we can learn things by bringing a lot of computation power against these big data sets. So that all is happening to try to make us smarter. We also partner with private sector firms that are coming up with new tracking of consumer behavior. And we're always examining them. Maybe they give us more insight into where inflation is going. So we're always innovating to try to get better at forecasting the economy. I joked with some of our economists that the thing about our economic models that we have, and we've got brilliant models, is the one thing you can be confident of is they're going to be wrong 100% of the time. 100% of the time. Because there's so many things happening in the economy. You have to simplify the economy enough, but one of your simplifying assumptions is going to end up being the wrong simplifying assumption, but you just don't know in advance which one is going to be the wrong simplifying assumption. If you go back, we missed, you're probably aware of this, we missed the big inflation surge that happened after COVID. Like a lot of us, and myself included, said, hey, we think it's going to be transitory, meaning temporary. It ended up being much higher than we expected and much longer lived than we expected. Why did we miss it? We missed it because our workhorse economic models developed over decades have taught us that inflation comes from two things. It comes from a very tight labor market. Businesses competing with each other to find workers, paying up wages, that then gets passed on to customers. And it comes from inflation expectations becoming unanchored. What that means is if you and I all now believe high inflation is the new normal, we all adjust our behavior in a way that makes that high inflation more likely to actually happen. Well, those are the way that inflation gets generated. So we were laser focused looking at those signals. Those signals were not flashing red. And then supply chains got gummed up, and we had a new source of inflation that we had not seen in any of our lifetimes. So that's why we missed it. This happens all the time. It's like we keep saying, well, the great financial crisis was a 1 in 100 event. And COVID was a 1 in 100 event. And we keep having these 1 in 100 events. They're different 1 in 100 events, but they really make modeling the economy exceptionally difficult.
So there's that's fascinating. I mean, there's this like a standard quip that if you have a model and you have your data and the model doesn't match the data, which do you believe? And the engineering joke is, well, it depends if you're an experimentalist or a theorist. I'll leave that one with you. To be able to make sense of all of these different types of complex, like you're saying, models, or understanding different sources of inflation, and trying to figure out like some of the new things, it's really hard, I would anticipate, for an individual to know everything. And so I would assume that you have to put together teams. And so Minnesota, one of the things we're very proud of, brag points for those of you who didn't know, I think earlier this year, or late last year, we were ranked as the top university, public university in the world for interdisciplinary research. That's something we do very well here. So I'm curious, and it's because we go after some of these big, hairy problems that it's really tough to know yourself, just as an individual, how to go after these. I'm curious for like the Fed, like how do you different disciplines inside the Fed come together to address some of the types of challenges that you might have? I mean, I'm assuming you have like political science, business, maybe some STEM people, economists. How do you put together teams to address these?
For monetary policy, it really happens at the highest level, which is the Federal Open Market Committee, which is the Federal Open Market Committee is made up of their 12 Reserve Bank presidents and then their 7 governors in Washington. And there's a mix of a lot of PhD economists. There are a couple, I'm an engineer. Pat Harker, the Philly Fed, the now retiring Philly Fed president, was an operations engineer, PhD. You've got business practitioners and you've got bankers. So there's a mix there. It's not as diverse as you might want, but there's actually quite a bit of diversity there. Once you go a layer down into that and you're into our research departments, it really is dominated by PhD economists. And then you've got macroeconomists and labor economists and whatnot. And so that diversity of thought happens more at the more senior levels. And if you came in and you met with me and our research department of PhD economists, our policy debates are like intellectual wrestling matches in a very positive way. I mean, nobody's yelling at each other, but we're really challenging each other because I walk into that room knowing I don't know the answer, but also knowing that they don't know the answer. And they know that I know that they don't know the answer. So, let's all set our egos aside and let's just look at the data and let's roll up our sleeves and let's try to figure out what are the ways we could explain what we're observing.
Cool. So if somebody wanted to get into that, like for individuals with technology backgrounds, if they wanted to move into the policymaking or financial sectors, and they came to you and said, all right, this is what I want to do. How should I prep for it? Should I go work at NASA and TRW, or should I?
I didn't know anything about this until I went to Washington. So I would say if somebody's interested in the policy arena and you have a technical background, one, you could look at the agencies of government, so the Department of Energy or whatnot, EPA, that are doing related work. There might be opportunities directly there. Or Department of Defense, et cetera. Another place there are many congressional committees of relevant jurisdictions. So there's an energy committee, for example, if you wanted to go work on energy policy issues, and they have a professional staff that supports that committee. So the members of Congress might turn over, but there can be more continuity in some cases on some of the professional staff. So there are actually, and then there are think tanks that do work around these areas as well. So there are many avenues for people who want to get involved in the policy arena where you can bring your technical expertise to bear and help analyze really important public policy issues for the country.
Cool. Thanks. And for those of you thinking about that, thank you in advance for your service, because it is really, really valuable. Some of the ideas that come out of there, they actually do go on to shape how we operate in this country. Want to start off sort of again a macro level a little bit, and then come down to your perspective. It was a little bit disappointing to me, like when I was actually looking at poll numbers in terms of how the rest of the country sort of sees, higher ed. I think there was a Gallup poll that said that the confidence in higher ed in the U.S. had dropped from 57% in 2015 to 36% in 2023, which was a record low. Now, given the decline in public confidence in higher education, what's your perspective on the value of higher education, particularly in the STEM fields?
I mean, I'm biased too. Never been more valuable and only increasing in value. If you look, there's a lot of anxiety some people have about AI and what it's going to do to the workforce. I'm strongly bullish on labor. When automation was brought into agriculture, people said, oh, the end of labor. It was not the end of labor. Labor shifted. Now, those disruptions can be challenging for the individuals directly affected, no question. But long road ahead for labor. I think that's going to continue to be true. But as technology has continued to penetrate our economy, the need for workers to have skills has continued to increase. So to me, the value of education has never been higher, especially in technical related fields, never been higher. I think the challenge for us from a public policy perspective is how do we give that world-class education to more of our young people without just saying, well, the answer is more debt. That's not an answer. That is not a scalable solution. And so how do we find scalable solutions to educate more of our young people? That's the challenge for all of you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Challenge accepted. Agree 100%. And when you go through some of the disruptions, like one of the ones that I hear a lot is about AI. And will it disrupt not just sort of the service sector, but possibly even the computer science field. Now you sort of need just a few experts, and you don't need as many folks that are banging out code because that can be done by AI. Now, what do you think about sort of this AI discourse that's going on? Is it like the agricultural machinery, where this is just sort of a natural evolution, or are we truly at sort of an apocalyptic event for?
Yeah, I don't buy the apocalyptic predictions. Silicon Valley, God bless them, they do a lot of great innovation, but they also make some ridiculous predictions, most of which are wrong. 5 years ago, they told us that self-driving trucks were right around the corner and all the long-haul truck drivers were doomed. 5 years later, we're no closer to that reality than we were 5 years ago. I mean, I think eventually it'll come to pass, but it's not nearly as rapid as they like to say. And I think there's going to be, even if computer programming becomes much more efficient in terms of what one skilled programmer can do, great. That programmer can now generate so much more code and be so much more productive. And so, again, it's going to be changing and disruptive. I use AI tools. I mean, I find just in terms of my search queries, what I would used to go to Google for, I now go to Grok for, and it is so much better than, it's extraordinary how much better it is in terms of getting me quick information. That I'll give you just a silly example. I gave a toast for my colleague, Pat Harker, at the Philadelphia Fed, who's retiring. And I wanted to see if an AI tool could summarize Pat Harker's monetary policy contributions. So I went into ChatGPT and Gemini and Grok, and only Grok could do this. And I said, go into the transcripts from the Federal Open Market Committee. So when we deliberate, 5 years later, a transcript is released publicly. I gave it a link to where I could find the transcripts. I said, go into the transcripts and give me a synopsis of Pat Harker's monetary policy contributions. It did it in minutes, and it was right. One or two words here or there were wrong, but and it compared his contributions to other members of the committee, and it was right. Then it made some references that Pat likes to make a joke here or there, made some reference to his humor, and I said, give me an analysis of Pat Harker's humor. And it gave me an analysis of Pat Harker's humor. For me to have done that would have taken me, I wouldn't have done it. It would have taken me hours and hours and hours of work. And it did it like that, and it was right. That's extraordinary.
Wow. Now I'm wondering what,
I didn't do it for myself.
I was going to say for me, and I'm thinking what will Grok say if they put it. Okay, so the future is what it is, but let's not get too carried away on the hype on this. All right.
I don't know. What do you think?
Fair enough. Similarly, that's a great question. I'll give you the cards here. AI, and I saw this coming. My background's in the controls area, and so back in the 90s, we were looking at neural nets for decision making. You train them to take a set of inputs and spit out some outputs that you could use as a decision making tool. And so AI, I see it as sort of an evolution. There's not something to fear or anything like that. For the last 40 years, information and the knowledge economy has continued to progress. We've gotten much better at being able to transmit information. I mean, the telegraph you're talking about earlier, I mean, that's how we used to transmit information. Before that was a letter, right? And then we got telephones, okay? Now we can move, gigabits of information around in milliseconds. Similarly, computation. We used to be able to do, so many calculations, and you've just seen that steady rise as a function of time. AI, it is, at its core, it's kind of sort of like Excel, right? You got a table, you put some things in, and you run a little algorithm, and you'll spit out some answers. Yes, it might be able to predict certain things about whether that is a cat or a cow or a person in the street, but that's all based on analysis of information and crunching a lot of data. I don't see this stopping. I do see this as a natural progression, and we'll become better and better and better, and we'll start to adapt. The big thing, the phase change, I think, a little bit was things, well, apart from the transformer and the ability to go ahead and be a little bit better with some of these large language models, there's still a bunch of other types of models that underpin the general ML/AI, but the computation became a lot cheaper. And you cross a threshold at which you can actually start to make some of those decisions in a reasonable amount of time on reasonable hardware. Like, I think a lot of the stuff that you can do now with your cell phone, I mean, if you had enough information, you could do those back in the 90s. It's just it would be really, really expensive and a whole lot of very expensive hardware. So I see this as a path. I don't see it as a reason to fear it. And we're just going to keep going down that path with greater and greater information flow and the ability to make decisions with larger and larger sets of information. That's my personal opinion. So, you've obviously seen a lot. Are there any sort of macroeconomic trends that you can think of that are most pressing that you can sort of see might affect us as a society or a state, the university, even down to our college levels? Are there things that you're starting to see, and we're not asking for any sort of inside information, but just sort of general things you can pick out, and these could be either
other than current events.
Well played, well played, sir. Well played. Yes. Other than current events, and even the current events, I don't see that as a structural shift. I remember talking to somebody about sort of, again, division and being divided as a society and bemoaning the fact how divided we are. And this former deputy governor for state of Maryland, we were at a meeting. She said, she's much senior than I am. Young person, sit down and let me give you an education on what the 1960s were like. And proceeded to go ahead and tell me how divided the country was during the Vietnam War, with lessons and specific examples that maybe you go, okay, yes, we've gone through these. So I see the division here as something, might be a little bit temporary. I'm thinking more like things like, is energy actually becoming cheaper? Are supply chains becoming much more interconnected? That's a macroeconomic trend. Birth rates. Are they dropping everywhere? What does that mean for us as a society? Aging. Those are some that I think about. And the other thing I think about, and that's why I'm really curious your perspective, are those risks to us, or are they opportunities? Or are they both?
Yeah. Well, the birth rate one is something that's dominant in most macroeconomic modeling of how economies perform. And it's happening in advanced economies all around the world, and in some developing economies like China. China has this, you probably know this, has this extraordinarily negative demographic profile, driven in large part by their one-child policy, which they didn't realize what it was going to do to their society forward 30, 40, 50 years. It's extraordinary. Japan has faced this longer than most other advanced economies. Europe is further ahead than we are. We've been marginally better, having more per capita children than other of our peer societies, but we've been able to augment that with immigration. And that's not available to many countries. It's not really available to China culturally. It's not available to Japan culturally. And so they've been trying to bribe their families to have more babies. Literally, here's a tax credit. Go have more babies. It doesn't work, by the way. It's like people decide not to do it. It's not about money. It's about a lot of other things. It's not about money. And so when you have this aging society and you're not having children to replace you, it leads to all sorts of challenges for the economy. Economic growth, funding of entitlement programs, whether it's Medicare, or Social Security, or their equivalent programs, huge challenge. So the demographics are a big deal. And if, I'm going to be an optimist now, if we can get our immigration system sorted out in America, then it's an extraordinary tool. It has been an extraordinary tool for us over our history. It can be an extraordinary tool for us again, but it's a political challenge, and we have to somehow get through the politics.
Here. As an immigrant, I can attest to the fact that it does open up a lot of opportunities, both for the individual as well as for hopefully the country as well too. So a last question on the sort of scripted session, then we'll sort of open it up to the audience.
I didn't realize this was a scripted session, but that's good.
Yeah.
We had
I've been reading on
my AI is feeding
exactly,
you questions.
Exactly. No. And this is one that I've been asked before, and at various points in time, I've struggled with what to say. I'm curious to know what you'd say. If you were looking at a 18 to 22-year-old Neel Kashkari, right, and they had their whole life ahead of them, right? What guidance would you be able to give them? And let's just say they were going into engineering, because most of these folks here are scientists or engineers. What kind of advice would you give them professionally, maybe personally in terms of like facing a world that's going to change like that?
I guess, what I would give the advice to young Neel Kashkari is don't do so much stupid shit. But I wouldn't give that advice generally speaking. So generally speaking, I would say this is not earth-shattering. Pursue things that you are most interested in. If it's intellectually curious to you and you're genuinely interested, you're more likely to apply yourself fully and you're more likely to be successful doing it. And be willing to take risks. One of the things that I've done throughout my career, and I don't mean like physical risks, although I do some of that. I mean taking career risks where you are, there's enormous, especially for young people, there's enormous momentum by what your peers are doing. If all of your peers are doing something, like you feel this enormous pressure that must be the right thing to do. And I need to go do that too. And the key moments in my career is when I've said, no. I understand everybody's going and doing that. I'm not doing that. I'm making a very different choice. When I left engineering to go get my MBA, my manager's like, wait, you're supposed to go get your PhD. And I said, I got it. I hear you. But I'm going to go explore a different world. And that was a risk that was really unorthodox for all of my peers as young engineers in the aerospace field at that time. Or those who did get their MBA, they kept working and got it part-time. And I said, no. If I'm really going to explore this, I got to leave engineering and I got to go full-time to a top MBA program to really open doors and see what else is out there. When I left Goldman Sachs to go to Treasury, my people around me were like, are you nuts? You're going to leave your career, you're doing well at Goldman Sachs to go take a staff job at the Treasury Department? That's nuts. And I said, you're nuts. You don't get it. This is an extraordinary chance for me to learn something totally new. So I don't know. I found that there were enormous forces trying to keep me on the track. And it took a little bit of courage for me to say, nah, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something different. So I'd say two things.
And we're very, very grateful that you did.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, very happy. So we have some time now from the audience, a little open Q&A. Try and keep your questions brief. We've got a couple of mic runners here, Megan and Justin. So is there a question? Just raise your hand. Question for him, by the way, not for me. Questions for him. This one here.
Hi, good evening. Also, may I join the Illinois reunion? I did my undergrad at UIUC.
Wonderful.
So actually, I arrived at this completely. I'm a math guy from first principles, control theory, actually. So this is a question, if you can answer, I appreciate it. Is there a possibility that if tariffs reconstitute the flow of capital into America, that would put an upward pressure on the neutral rate for the Fed?
Well, yes. So let me explain the gentleman's question. Why do we have a trade deficit? This is economic math. We have a trade deficit because investors around the world have decided that America is the best place to invest. So any country that is the premier place to invest and the capital flows in, the math works that that country will have a trade deficit. And how does that premier, you hear about American exceptionalism in economics, this is part of what it means. So if capital is flowing into America, then on average, we're going to have lower interest rates because interest rates are set by the balance between savings and investment. So we want to invest this much, but everybody wants to pour their savings into America. The interest rates that we borrow at will be lower. So if we're now going to change that, so we no longer have a trade deficit, so that we no longer are the singular premier destination for capital, less capital will be flowing into America, the interest rate will go up, and the neutral rate that balances the economy will be higher. So yes, that's to answer your question.
Thanks. This is completely from first principles math and control theory, so I'm very happy to have it confirmed by you.
Good. Well, it's a very good question. So well done.
Do you see the Fed will have a role in the innovation and also like in the cryptocurrency, for example, creating a platform, also creating regulations?
What was the first part? Your role in innovation? The crypto. So the only role that we directly have in innovation is if we try to manage the ups and downs of the economic cycles, and it provides more stability for you and for businesses to do your best work and to innovate, as opposed to if we did a lousy job and we're having deep recessions or depressions, then that can really be disruptive to these investment plans. So I think that's our biggest contribution, is some level of economic stability so that you all can invest and innovate for the long term. In terms of cryptocurrency, while I'm strongly bullish, as we talked about, on AI, crypto's now been around for 10 or 15 years, and the truth is, other than as an instrument of speculation, it's basically useless in an advanced economy. It's just a toy. It's like an instrument of, you want to bet it's going to go higher, and you're going to bet somebody else will buy it from you higher, so go ahead and bet. The only use case is getting around regulation. So we have bank regulations that banks are subjected to. Some people use crypto, Bitcoin, to circumvent bank regulations. But as an actual legal, as a productive use case for society, it's been 15 years and it hasn't been demonstrated yet. And I keep asking all the crypto enthusiasts to explain it to me. And basically, it's a bunch of hot air that they come back to me with. So, we'll see if something useful comes out of it. But in terms of regulating crypto, Congress, it's ultimately up to Congress, who are debating possible legislative scenarios for creating a regulatory framework around crypto. That would be up to Congress.
Your comment seems to contradict with our president.
Question over there. There's a runner with the mic. Oh, okay.
I'm happy to go next. Neel, thank you for all what you've been doing. I'm a huge fan of yours since your dark days, and I've been following you since then. My question is, since you said you're an optimist, what is the most optimistic thing that can happen to our economy over the next year?
If there's a resolution of trade disputes with our major trading partners, that would relieve extraordinary uncertainty that businesses and people businesses large and small and people across the country are experiencing right now. I've said this publicly, that the last 2 months has been the biggest negative downturn in confidence in our economy since I've been at the Fed, almost 10 years, except for March of 2020 when COVID hit. It's that big a deal. And the thing about confidence is, if we all get nervous at the same time and we say, you know what, I'm not going to take my family on that vacation. I'm not going to splurge. I'm not going to renovate my house. Or businesses say, I'm not going to hire those extra workers or build that factory. If we all do that at the same time, it can really bring down the economy, really slow it down. And so if there are resolutions to these trade frictions, hopefully quickly, it could relieve that, and that would be relative upside, relieving some of that uncertainty that we're experiencing right now. Sorry, it's hard to see you. The lights are very bright, so we're like looking at shadows.
With respect to modeling that you are saying we have, our modeling has not been complete, and for us to make a correct decision, is the technology of big data when we have huge set of data now? Because every modeling that we have used, we use sample of our real model, real data actually, because of the competition issue, because of the space issue. But now that we have the technology allows and we can use big data, is that possible that our future model be more complete?
I hope so. I'm skeptical, just because the global economy is so complicated. You know, what data set would you have had that would have told you that COVID's going to hit the global economy? What data set would you have had that would have told you that we're going to have this major trade war? And it's a little bit like, this is, I don't know, the economists I work with may not like me making this comparison. It's a little bit like forecasting the weather. Atmospheric scientists have massive models. They have supercomputers. They have satellites. They can tell you next June, the average weather in Minnesota is probably going to be 65 degrees. And they can tell you nothing about the weather on June 7th. Or almost nothing about the weather on June 7th. And so, June 7th of 2026. So, when is our weather forecasting going to get good enough to be able to tell you what the weather is going to be like on a given day a year from now? There's just so many things happening at the same time that are hard to capture. You know, can we do better? Yes, we're going to keep trying to do better. But ultimately, at every meeting that we have at the FOMC, we get data from the economy that is sending us mixed signals. Is the economy going up? Is it going down? Is inflation going up? Is inflation going down? And ultimately, we talk to a lot of businesses and labor groups and workers, and then we use judgment to try to figure out what's the signal from this conflicting data that we're getting all the time.
You don't mind? I have one more quick one.
Just hold the mic close to your
Yeah.
mouth.
With respect to services that we provide and the deficit and supply and all the services that we provide to import, export rather, they are outside of the discussion that we have these days with respect to deficit. Why don't they? Why? Because we don't have deficit in the services that we are providing to hemisphere. So why don't government don't discuss the non-deficit or that we have on the service side?
Yeah, it's really, I don't mean to pun, it's really a political question, and I don't mean partisan politics, but in our political system, there are types of work that get a lot of political attention. So say manufacturing gets a lot of attention amongst both sides of the aisle. And if you look at manufacturing in America over time, we've become fabulously efficient in manufacturing. But the number of people we have doing the manufacturing has declined because that efficiency has come from technology and from automation. And so that sector right now in this moment has captured a lot of attention more than other sectors of the economy.
I think we could say the same for agriculture,
It's
too.
true, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
One of the interesting things, too, to follow on the question that was asked here about the models and the long-run accuracy, it seems like, you know, even if we had really, really complicated models, many of these, they're not very well conditioned. So small perturbations in particular initial conditions or when you restart can take you to such widely disparate solutions that long-run accuracy is very, very hard to get. Even if you had the exact right model, you know, like a precision, you know, if I ran it as sort of 8-bit instead of 16-bit or something like that, it would be enough to throw me off and put me in a completely different set, which sort of fundamentally makes it hard to represent.
In our workhorse economic models that we use for the economy, and these are state of the art, it's very difficult to generate a recession, even though recessions happen. Like you have to force the model by tweaking a bunch of variables to generate a recession, by adding a bunch of nonlinear effects in there to get it to happen. We know recessions happen. And yet the models at their core mean revert. And they mean revert in a pretty elegant way. And it's like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure the world is not going to be as elegant as the model is saying. That doesn't mean the models aren't helpful. They help us think about trade-offs in different scenarios. But you just know that it's not going to be right.
I'm a new grad engineer, and then ever since I graduated, so like for the last 2 years, I've seen a current trend of technology companies laying off. So you see waves of layoffs happening from Google to Microsoft to like the big leading companies, and it decreased the job stability and security to a lot of people as well. So because we're talking about the future, how do you see like as like the position of like a policymaker, what this change is going towards? There going to be more layoff? Is layoff becoming the norm? Or are we not going to have more that as much layoff and people can have a longer position in their, a longer time in their current position?
Well, I think some of the tech layoffs that you're talking about, which you're right, have happened over the last couple of years, in part because the tech companies hired so much leading up to that. And I think many tech companies said, okay, we kind of overdid it. We were scrambling for workers. We overdid it. We now need to streamline. And that's different than what I'm a little bit worried about right now. Which I'm a little bit worried about right now is there's enough overhang and uncertainty in the economy that maybe businesses are going to start laying people off. We haven't seen it yet, that there's some big tariff uncertainty-induced layoffs yet in the economy, but that's something that I'm nervous about, watching carefully for. We're not seeing an uptick, for example, in unemployment claims yet. We're not seeing announcements of big layoffs yet, though some businesses report to us that they're scenario planning for potential layoffs depending how long this uncertainty lasts. So I think what you've described so far is more of the normal ups and downs of a given sector. I'm long-term bullish on technology in America. I'm long-term bullish on STEM as fields. But I'm not dismissive of the fact that individuals in a moment can face challenges. When I graduated from Wharton in 2002, I decided to go into the tech financial area, tech banking area. And that area was in a deep depression after the tech bubble had burst. And so I know there can be real challenges. But I just think relative to other places, being in STEM in America right now, I'm bullish about your career prospects.
Thank you very much. So you work for the local regional Fed, and I was curious how you see the challenges of our local regional economy versus the economy of the country. The university often has a large local focus as well as national focus, and so I was just hoping you could comment on that.
It's funny, our region that we represent, the Minneapolis Fed, looks a lot like the country as a whole, because we have a lot of ag, we have manufacturing, we have a lot of services, we have healthcare, we have some technology, we have some commodities. So what happens here kind of happens nationally, what happens nationally kind of happens here. The areas here that are feeling most pressure are ag-related. They were already, ag has cycles. It's a commodity market, it has cycles. It was already in a relatively low point in terms of commodity crop prices. And now there's great nervousness about the tariffs and reciprocal tariffs, especially coming from China. We export a lot of soybeans. Where are those soybeans going to go if China's going to be buying from Brazil instead of buying for us? And then, of course, manufacturing, I've heard some optimism that maybe if there's some more demand for domestically produced goods, that'll be good for local manufacturers, but it's highly uncertain right now. And so I think overall, we look kind of like the country as a whole. We have a somewhat lower unemployment rate here in Minnesota than the country as a whole, but I think we're relatively similarly positioned.
We have time for one more question from the audience.
Thank you so much. You've made the point several times that to a certain degree, consumer sentiment is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We start to worry, we all get worried, we're all worried, and then there's a problem. Or the same way, the other way around. So I'm hesitant to ask this question, but what keeps you awake at night? We can all lose sleep over it then.
Thank you very much for coming now.
Things are changing every day. So the Fed handles monetary policy. We move interest rates around to try to manage the ups and downs of the U.S. economy in the next year or two. But these bigger issues that we've been talking about, whether it's trade policy or tax policy or fiscal policy or education policy, these are the things that actually set America's competitiveness over the long run. And right now, the frequency of announcements that are coming out of Washington, it's hard to keep up with and to process what they mean, because by the time you've analyzed it, we're in a new situation a couple days later. And so I think that's created a challenge for policymakers. I think it's created a challenge for everybody.
Well, I want to thank you all, but before there's a get off the stage question, just because Bonnie brought up something. Here in the university, we face a great deal of uncertainty as well, too, as we were just talking about before. And many of the directives that come out of the federal government impact us. And as an academic leader, it's easy to sort of get pretty high, and, well, actually not pretty high, get pretty low, and then come back to the mean and get pretty low.
Then does the mean move?
the thing that it struck me. It was about a month ago. I had a meeting with our. It was part of a strategic planning activity that we're doing with our SESB. It's the student board, student board, society board, and talking to there's probably maybe about 60, 70 of our undergraduate students across all the different fields about what they would like the university to be. How they think it could to impact the world that they live in. And when I left that, I'd had a pretty tough day until then, because that's when we had a couple of announcements come. I left that meeting that evening. I was smiling. I was actually feeling really good. I was like, yeah, the kids are all right. Tough as it, we got this. So interacting with some of the younger people is what gives me hope. As challenging as things are, and certainty as things are there certain things in your world that you see sort of day to day that sort of yeah, we got this. We've seen tougher. We got
this. Yeah.
So
it's something that you said. I can't remember who said it to you, but it completely resonated with me. I read a lot of history. This moment is not that remarkable. Some of the numbers are remarkable, et cetera. But if you read our nation's history, the period that you and I grew up in, of relative political harmony, is the anomaly. It is not the norm. The norm is there's a lot of political strife in America, and we've gotten through that before. And so I'm absolutely confident that we will get through this again, and better, brighter days. As much and many challenges as we have, I would not trade places with any other country in the world by miles. Our problems that we have here, we can address them. It's within our capacity to address them. Some other challenges are not in a country's capacity to address.
Well, on that, a very positive, bright, hopeful note, things will get better. Let me thank Neel, and let me ask you all to thank Neel as well, too, for a wonderful hour. Thank you so much. This is great. This has been awesome. Thank you. And for those of you online, thanks for tuning in. We do have a reception out there for some light bites if you are planning to stick around. And thanks again.
Thank you.